open up. Good. So this is Shir in Sefer HaTanya. We're holding at the moment right at the very beginning of Perek Daled, which is on Omad Ches of the printed Sefer. And today is Sunday afternoon, early evening, Oyer LeDaled Odor Toshin Ayin Beis. Daled Odor Toshin Ayin Beis. All right. So now we open this Perek with a further development that the Alter Rebbe has been right from the beginning of Perek, well, at the beginning, but early in Perek Aleph, the Alter Rebbe has been mapping out to us the makeup and the koiches of the Jewish soul. And in Perek Beis, he told us all about the source of the Etzem Neshama Kamoshahu, which is a chelik elokah mimar, but he also hinted at different madrigas in the Neshama, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Then he moved on in Perek Gimel to what we call the koiches of the Neshama, the powers and the attributes of the Neshama. Listen, you must come on time. Get over here. And they were 10 koiches, 10 powers of the soul. We saw they were nishtalshel from the Esser Spheres Ha'elyonos, which means that the 10 powers of the soul are koiches nafshiyim. They are soul-like powers and characteristics which reveal themselves from the neshama, like a kli is a receptacle to oil, to a light, a divine light. The soul gives off light into these vessels, and they function as a direct expressing or direct I would use the word expressing entity of the neshama. In other words, that they are koiches which belong, in inverted commas, in a very real way to the neshama. They are her kelim, they're her own, as it were, an individual, in inverted commas, personal means of expression, the 10 koiches. Over they are united, betachlis actus with the neshama, to the point that they're called in other places, and they can be sometimes referred to, like the Spheres Ha'elyonos. They're like ornaments almost of the neshama. They're united betachlis with the neshama. However, now in Perek Daled, we're going to see that there's a further tremendously significant aspect of the function of the neshama in the body, or things which the neshama function through them in the body, and they're called the levushim. What levushim means, garments. And that's what he begins now, the Alter Rebbe. Perek Daled, v'oid yesh, and v'oid means and furthermore, or in addition to what we spoke about before, the powers of the neshama, the 10 powers of the neshama. In furthermore, we have yesh l'kol nefesh elokis shleisha levushim. In addition, there are, for every nefesh elokis, there are 3 levushim, 3 garments. Now, shehem, machshava, dibur, u'maisa, shel taryag mitzvah satera. They are the thought, the speech, and the action of the 613 commandments of the Torah. Now, here we're moving to a much more practical and what we might call chitzonius aspect of the neshama, and that's levusha. Like we see a garment by a mensch is a dover chitzoni legabi him. It's not him at all, really, the levush. However, davke through the garment, he's able to express himself and appear in this world. That's to say, I can't hear you. You have to speak up. You have to tell someone. I don't hear. I'm deaf.
Yeah. He wants to say hello.
Mayor wants to say shalom, Rav. We came all this way to say shalom to you.
We're right in the middle of a program. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot of nachas for him to be much there. I'm sorry I'm a little bit offhand, but I'm in the middle of a class. So we see that the function of a garment by a mensch is that in a ultimately true way, a mensch for himself, in his absolute self, he doesn't really need garments. I mean, we can imagine, it wouldn't be a very tzniustic thing, but we can imagine him being without garments. He only needs garments for the sake of appearing and revealing himself to the world and to those around him. He has to have garments. And those garments are like a way that he can appear and reveal himself in a meaningful way in front of both himself, to a certain extent, and others. Because when he dresses up, then he's much more functioning in himself as well. He's more, particularly if the garments fitting to him and they're good garments, then he gains from that a lot also mentally and psychologically. Also, the type of garments that he wears are expressions of the type of person that he is be'etzem. For example, in generations gone by, particularly in the European countries, people who were carpenters wore a special type of bush. They wore a special, and it was known, if you just looked at the garments that he wore, you knew he was a carpenter. A shoe fixer and other garments altogether. A plumber wore another type of garment, and it was possible to know immediately from the garment who the person was or what was his function. Now, the garment is certainly not him. It's a separate entity, and like we saw, it's a dover chitzoni. It's an outward entity. However, it does have the ability of expressing and carrying the etzem of the mensch, the very essence of the person, outwards to express himself in the world and to be able to appear in an ordered way in the world. So that would imply that the Nefesh Elokis, with all these powers that we have here, the Nefesh Elokis is still withdrawn from active expression in this world. And we're going to see in a minute, when we deepen ourselves in that sentence we just read, we're going to see that ultimately the neshama can't really perform her ultimate purpose of having come into the world and entered the body unless she has these garments. Because all the things that we mentioned before, seichel, reasoning, and emotional traits, we mentioned in the previous parak, they're all things which are withdrawn in their very essence from the world. If a person has seichel, then he can reflect on the seichel, and that's what he does within himself. But to express the seichel to somebody else is another step. He's got to have some medium in which he can come from. That's a power of grasping a content and an idea and a musa, how they call it, a concept in his mind is one thing, but to give that out into the world around him or to people who will hear him, then he obviously needs some form of media, because these things are abstract in their very essence. The same with feeling. A person can feel a desire to help another person. He can have and he can have the pneumius of that chesed, which is ahavo. He can feel a love for the other person, and therefore that greatly stirs up the need to help him and the desire to help him. But how's he actually going to do that is another thing. To feel the feeling is one thing, or to actually do something about it is something, a further step. And we see an example of this, for example, by Avram Avinu, that he was a great Baal Chesed, and he used to take in Orchim, guests. That was one of his big reasons for having this tent, is with entrances from four sides, and he offered all sorts of posh meals in the desert. I don't know if you're familiar with the whole story brought down in the Midrash about it. As Avraham Avinu loved people, and because he loved them, he wanted to help them and give them, and also in Ruchnis he taught them the whole idea of Hashem Echad and the unity of Hashem and the oneness of Hashem, and the some existence of Hashem, basically. So it's brought down a medrash, and Rashi brings it at the beginning of Parsha Vayero. Rashi brings part of it, that Avraham Avinu, after he performed the Milah, so he was disabled for a few days. He wasn't able to sort of just be around on the outside and walk around and run around like he did prior to the Milah. So he was sitting in his tent right near the edge of the tent, and it was a very, very hot day, and he was concerned because it was a very hot day, and maybe not many guests would come. What's he doing with the guests? He's disabled at the moment. It's very hard, but nonetheless he was looking to see if there were guests, because if there were guests, then he would do something about it. He'd find some way of being makar of the guests. So it's brought down in the Siddur that Avraham Avinu could have just sat down and decided how much he loved people and just talked to himself for a few hours until his middle would get better, that he loves people and he really loves them. But that's not enough for the midah of chesed. The midah of chesed wants to come into action b'poel, and that you can't really satiate your midah of chesed unless you actually help somebody b'poel and you do a teva for somebody in action. So Avraham Avinu had the tremendous arousal of the midah, but that wasn't enough. The midah demanded action. Well, that demand of the action well, that's called what we're talking about here, a lavush. In other words, you need a medium through which you can bring down your lavush into the revelation of itself in the world in a practical way in which it will actually carry out its ultimate result. So we see that the midah of Av is a very high thing, still united with the soul. And it's still part of almost the Etzem soul itself. To get it into expression and to make it a real thing in the world, both for Gabi and yourself and other people, then you need a medium. Now that medium is what the Alter Rebbe calls lavush. That's what we use. That's why we use the word and the term lavush. Just like you see that without the lavush, you as with all your bodily and soul-like perfection, you can't actually relate to other people. But once you have the lavush, then you can relate, and your lavush also takes you in a certain way with messages to people. Just by being able to see your lavush, they know something about you. And therefore, if a person, that's why by Yidden, from Yidden, we're very careful what sort of lavush you wear, because lavush has a way of expressing you, bringing you into expression into the world. And if you wear a lavush which is not proper, then that sort of shows that there's something a bit funny about you, which is not complete in the purpose that Hashem had for a person who's united with Torah mitzvahs. And that's why in Tomchei Tmim there was always an insistence on the right type of lavush. So nowadays it's a hat and jacket or things of that sort. There's a need to have the right type of lavush, and through that it expresses what the neshama really wants to say to the world, and brings the message to other people, what they're supposed to know from the message that you have to the world, even just by seeing what's the way you dress. That can, to a certain extent, announce itself. So that's the union of a lavush. So says the Alter Rebbe, the Nefesh Elokis, with all its greatness, with all its wondrous powers, they are withdrawn and they are all united with the spirituality of the soul to come down in expression to the world. They need lavushim, and there are three of them. The three lavushim that the Nefesh Elokis needs are machshava. Now machshava, we're going to see, is a very united lavush. The Mittler Rebbe says in our famous Maimah, there's no time or minute when you don't think. And even if you feel, believe that you're not thinking, you're thinking about not thinking. In other words, you must always be thinking. Mashing talking, you don't always have to talk. On the contrary, you're a bit of you're a bit of a problem for people who just talk the whole time. In other words, the talking is something that you can stop, and which is proper to do, stop for a while, and then some other point you begin speaking again, or when it's necessary, etc. Maisa is also like that. You don't have to walk around the whole time doing things. You only undertake certain actions when, for some reason, it's necessary, or you're prompted into that by other effect. That's the three ways that we enter. So machshava, thought, is a lavush which brings the man from himself into revelation to himself. In other words, when he has a very deep concept, he absorbs that concept and grasps it within the realm of conceptuality. He sees what that concept is and he can understand its details, but he hasn't actually expressed them to himself. And when he expresses them to himself, they becomes much more ordered and clear to him the way, and he organizes it and sees it in a much more carefully expressed way, what he actually understood. So he said that from understanding, you've got to go first to yourself. You've got to reveal to yourself what you really experience, and that's called machshava. Yeah? And that is called the lavush ha'elyon, or the lavush ha'muchad. It's very, very united with your soul, and it's impossible to separate the lavush ha'machshava from your soul, or particularly your seichel, even for a moment. That's what's apparent, and it appears that even when you sleep, you're thinking also. There's a certain very, very detached form of thinking that goes on even when you're asleep. The machshava is the lavush ha'mu'uhad. Next, we move down into dibur. Dibur takes what you thought, and you have to first of all think. And once you've thought, then you work out in your thought what you're going to be able to speak and how to speak and how to order your speech. Your speech is a further step in expression, but it's an expression to others. Machshava, you are the other. You're like the Zulus, like having your own detached neshama. Speech takes you towards other people and other entities outside yourself. That's the union of speech. And then further down in a much more tangible way is Maisa. And Maisa means deed, and Maisa is like a separate lavush, very much, not like lavush and machshava, very united, because it goes out into the world and it performs itself, or expresses itself in all sorts of things which are not actually united with you anymore. They're actions which take place inside yourself. But nonetheless, they are also a form of expression, as well known. There's what they call body speaking, and also the way you do things, the way you do something, and the way you carry out an action. That's like an expression of yourself. It's a very clear, important expression of yourself. So that's the union of machshava, dibur, and maisa. Now, the nefesh habahamis, we're going to see as we go along, also has lavushim. So it also has machshava, dibur, and maisa. So that would tend to imply that the lavushim are not the same lavushim by the nefesh habahamis as they are here by the nefesh elokis. So what is the hierarchy then of this? And are the lavushim just some sort of spiritual entity, or are they also linked with a limb or part of the body? So the answer is, we often find it written in Chassidus that your speech is a special power. It's called koyach hadibur. We also talk about koyach hamachshava, the ability and the power of thought. And Koyach HaMaisa is also we talk about. Now, your body's got a series of kelim, the tongue and the roof of the mouth and the lips, as is brought down in Kabbalah. There are 5 basic moitos, or active forms of giving out in the mouth itself. The hey moitos apeh. All of those are like the union of dibur, and the levush hadibur is what you put into that dibur. The levush hadibur is what goes into those things that make up oasis of speech, which is called dibur. Now the same with machshava. There's a power in the brain, which actually is called a koyach moichi, or brain power, which gives forth this idea of thought, or which it's possible to cause the power of thought to dwell. And Maisa is the limbs of the body, they lead to the Koyach HaMaisa. Yeah? In other words, the Koyach HaMaisa is a levush for those and it fits into those limbs and those activities of the body. So in Cain, what exactly is levush? What are the levushim? So we have to say that there's different types of levushim for the Nefesh Elokis and different types of levushim for the Nefesh Abami. In other words, the basic areas where they function are the same: the mouth, the brain, and the body. But different levushim move in and take over depending on your will and depending on who you are. And that's what we're going to see in a second. The Alter Rebbe is going to call the person ha'odom, the mensch. And he said it all depends on the mensch. Kisha ha'odom, this or that, then the levushim will, as it were, alter. The garments will, they will enter the limbs for which they function. These garments, they will enter and take over that particular limb or area which gives rise to the levushim. So, now we see that there's an ability on the part of a mensch to decide what sort of, just like when he gets stressed, he decides what levushim he's going to put on. It's up to him whether he put on a sports suit or he put on a Hasidic suit, or whether he put on a hat, or a Hasidic hat, or he can put on any sort of thing. Everything's dependent on him. It's his choice as to what he puts on. And that's called Odom. The ability to choose and to show that you are the determiner of your actions and abilities, that's called Odom. And the reason for that is because the word Odom is from a word, which means to compare. It's from the word Domer. Odom is like a future tense of a verb from the word similar to, Adamer. And therefore there's a lashon, Adamer, I will be similar. Now, there was a big Goyish king, Yamach Shemoyah. He was bad news for the Jewish people. It was called Sancherib. Sancherib, he was in the Babylonian, he was the big Babylonian king during the time of Bais Rishon. As he once said about himself, Damer le'elyon, I'm similar to the Eibishter. And what he meant was he was ineffective. That's what he meant. What he meant was to say about himself that he's a divinity, Adamer le'elyon. However, we see from that the word Odom means Adamer le'elyon. The word Odom is based on that word Adamer. And therefore, when you are similar, is to use a borrow, because he said that in a very bad way. We can borrow from that in a real way, which sort of does, and we can say that when you are Odom, when you're comparable to the Eibishter, Adamer le'elyon, then you are Odom. And so, who is it that has free choice? Is there any entity in this whole creation, in this whole world, that has free choice? Not really. No. Only the Eibishter's got free choice. The emes of free choice is only by Hashem. And the fact that we have a Nefesh Elokis, which is a Chelek Elokam Mimal, he gave us also free choice. The Yidden, he gave them free choice. And it's a very unusual and it's not understandable, but how you have free choice. Over all the rest of the creation doesn't have. Over you as a Yid, you have free choice. And therefore you can decide which levushim you're going to put on. Are you going to put on levushim of the Nefesh Elokis, or you're going to put on levushim of the Nefesh Habami? So what are these levushim? at a Nefesh Elokis that the Nefesh Elokis puts on itself in the proper way, in the way it's met, as a Nefesh Elokis put on her Levushim. What are they? So that's what we're going to learn now. That's what he says. Yesh lekol Nefesh Elokis shloish Levushim shehem machshova dibur ma'aser. We just explained shel Tariag mitzvahs haTorah, from the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. In other words, what are your levushim of your Nefesh Elokis? The Tariag mitzvahs haTorah. They're your levushim. In other words, that the Torah is a levush. And as it's written about the Torah, it's written a pasuk in Nach, Oite oyer kesalma, noite shomayim ka'yiriyo. About the curtains in last week's, the Uriah means like a curtain or a covering. The Eibishter literally put on a lavush, the divine light that he sent forth into the creation is like a lavush. Salma. Salma means a dress or a garment. The heavens are just like a curtain to him. In other words, that the Kaviyachol, the Eibishter sees the Torah as a lavush. And the Torah is like a big garment waiting for somebody to put it on. And who are the ones who put it on? The Yidden are the ones who put it on. Of you as a Odom, that's what he says now. Kasheha Odom Makayim b'maisa, when a mensch keeps indeed kol mitzvahs maisias, he keeps all the active mitzvahs, v'dibur, and in speech, who oisek b'pirush kol tariach mitzvahs, he talks about the pirush, the explanation, and the meaning of all the 613 mitzvahs, hilchoseihen, and all the halachas, which is a heck of a lot, is well known. The Medrash teaches that there's really no end of number to the halachas. As it teaches halachas ein mispah, that's a whole Indian. But there's plenty to talk about, to use your speech in all the halachas of the mitzvahs. Uba machshova, and in machshova, hu masi kol masi efshalei lahasi, he grasps all that is possible to grasp, but pshat remez drush seid of the Torah, all four levels of the Torah. Then, says the Alter Rebbe, Ari kloros tariag eivrei nafshoi, of the generality of the 613 limbs of his limbs of his soul, the limbs of his soul. Now, what's the soul doing with limbs? I mean, body has limbs, but the soul has. Well, those are the koiches that we mentioned before. The koiches are so part of the neshama that they call it like its limbs. Here the Alter Rebbe said the Tariag, the 613 of it. We spoke about 10, but it's put down in the Zohar and in other places. It's also Nirmas in the Gemara at the end of Masechta Makis, that just like the 613 commandments, you have 613 what do you call them, gidim, like sinews and limbs, and all those limbs can be divided into all sorts of small areas, and all together, if you add them all up, you got Tariag. And the Neshama has also got Tariag. So the Neshama has got Tariag. In other words, that the 10 main koiches interdivide and split up into a tremendously numerous way of expression, in that there's 613 of them. And they're called Eivrei Nafshoi. Actually, the limbs of your soul, then the generality of the 613 limbs of your soul, that means spiritual powers, not physical limbs, but spiritual powers. They are mulubashim, enclosed, tadiag mitzvahs haTorah. All enclosed, mulubash, they've been put inside a garment of the 613 mitzvahs haTorah. So here we have to pay attention, and here it would seem that we're being told by the Alter Rebbe, you have certain powers in the makeup of the body. What they are, the kelim, as you might call them, of the levushim. They're like the body of the levushim, and the levushim dress themselves up in the mouth like we said, like in the brain and in the power of activity, the limbs of the body and the power of activity, and the levushim that dress up in those places are, says the Alter Rebbe, the Tariag mitzvahs HaTorah, the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, and the study of the Torah, which is the limit of the Torah, to understand the Torah. In other words, it's also a mitzvah, but it's a very special mitzvah, but it's shayat to machshava b'miyuchad, because that's got to do with the idea of thinking and understanding, but in a very real way, but get to halachas. What are halachas? Halachas are the expression of the Torah in action and in Maisa. In other words, that the Torah, as we point out in its very shorish, is like a lavush, that Hashem meant that you should put on that lavush. The Torah, as it were, is a spiritual garment which is waiting for us to put it on. So how do we put on the Torah? How do we put on the spiritual garment of the Torah? How do we put the Torah on as a garment? That's what we call oisiyas. Here we meet up with a concept of letters. And by taking the letters of the Torah through a medium which Hashem has given you, which is dibur, or machshava, or even action, because action is also like a form of letters. As it's put down, it's like a form of expression through letters. You can literally, because you're an Adam, because you're Adam Mekayim B'maisa. When a man says that, he invites all the letters of the Torah into his little physical parts, where he can make them levushim, and they can become like garments on his soul through the function of the mouth, the activities, or the power of the brain to reflect, which is called machshava, or to think, which is called machshava. And so, how do you say to the Torah, come over to me? That's oishia. That's these things which are called letters, and they are the levushim, and they are the things that you invite into your area. Because you start thinking about, therefore the whole Torah is oishia. The Torah Shebiksav, it's all letters. The Torah, the Gemara, everything is all oishia. So what you do is you invite those oishis into the three aspects of the brain, and you put them on like levushim. They become like levushim. Because they're too outside and they're too chitonias to be linked with the powers of the soul. The powers of the soul are much too abstract, and they're linked within the makeup of the spirituality of the soul. They can't get out into expression. How do you get to expression? Through oishia. So it follows from that the levushim are really, basically speaking, oishiyas. And the Torah has all these oishiyas, and the Torah is prepared to pass its oishiyas into your consciousness, and you take them in, and you dress yourself up in those oishiyas. And then, once you do that, oishiyas, then you're able to talk, you're able to think to yourself, you're able to do action, because these oishiyas are media of expression. So what the Torah is like a huge waiting medium of expression that Hashem gave, that people should dress themselves up in that practical garment, which is the Torah, and through that express themselves into the world, but express themselves into the world the way the Torah wants it. To act and speak and think, only the way the Torah wants it. Only the way it's written in the Torah. And that's the Tariag mitzvahs HaTorah, being the levushim. The Torah is your levush. And divides down to three aspects of machshava d'maisa, three different types of oishiyas, and they enter the functioning part of your body that Hashem made corresponding to those oishiyas, and you take in those oishiyas, and then you use them, you feed them back as your method of expression to the world. So it comes out that it's an amazing thing. Our levushim and our way of expressing ourselves practically to all the world around us, including other human beings, is the Torah. That's our levush. That's the way it's supposed to be. But since you're Adam, then you have Bechira, you can say, no, I'm not going to have those oishiyas. I'm not going to let those oishiyas in either one or all of my levush, my three levushim. I'm going to let other oishiyas in. So the Nefesh Abamis has got all sorts of oishiyas, all ready to interfere with you, and to be dray you a cop, and to be mevalbu you, and to paint you and tell you all sorts of meisers and geschäften from this world, and that's the oisius of the Nefesh HaBahami. He's got libraries of them, and he just feeds you with all these thoughts and an opposite, all these diburim and all the other meisers and all the other idionim, and he wastes so much of your time. He gets into where the Torah levushim should be, and he takes over and he tends to foot out the oasis of the Torah, Rahman and Islam. And that's what's happening when you're thinking Mitzad your Nefesh HaBahami. You're ousting the oasis of the Tariq mitzvahs of Torah, and you're replacing them with the oasis of the Nefesh HaBahami. But you might say, well, what about in the middle? There seems to be a lot of things that I can think, I could act, and I could do, I could speak, that don't seem to be so terrible. There seem to be all sorts of things which are just, what you might call parallel. They're seichel-dicke things, or things that are practical, for my panosa, or for all sorts of inyanim. They're not, they don't seem to be mamish oasis of the Torah. They don't seem to be mamish oasis of the Nefesh HaBahami. So that's another realm which is called Nefesh HaSichlis. Now the Nefesh HaSichlis, he's also got his oasis. And they're much more harmless oasis, but they're also not tachlis HaKedusha. They're what's called Toiv Shebanoiga. They're like the better part of Klippas Noiga, and we spend a lot of our time floating around in such oasis as well. So a person has to make a cheshbon in himself. How much time does he really spend dressed up with the light levushim? Does he really take the oasis of the 613 mitzvahs of there in all their different aspects, and the limud Torah, Talmud Torah, does he put them into himself and he dresses neshama in that levush? Yeah, or does he do it in the levush of the Nefesh HaBahami? Or does he just sort of sit in the middle and he's just sort of dealing with the better part of Klippas Noiga, and he's just sort of, any old hell, but he's not really anywhere in particular. I mean, that's the cheshbon that we have to make with ourselves, and that cheshbon has to go on Keseda. What levush are we taking into our, or putting on to our neshama? And it's a pretty sobering when you think how much time you spend, all sorts of machshavas, which it would have been better for everybody and for yourself included, had you not bothered with that, had you really got into Torah. So Emes, a tzaddik, is somebody that he just takes all this very simply, and he says, I'm not going to bring into my keli for my levushim, or my body for my levushim, anything but good levushim. Oh, I'm going to bring in just the right levushim. So he's just into Torah the whole time, and he doesn't want to know about anything else. So he's pretty simple, isn't he? He's a simple. He's made a simple calculation, and he does it in a simple way. But the truth of the matter is, it's not so simple. It's not so simple, and we'll see about that more in coming and developing episodes. Basically.
Thank you.